Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, if you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.26 for our 2026 fundraising campaign. Visit the Film Florida merchandise page at filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. All merchandise proceeds go to the Film Florida Filmmaker Grant and Scholarship Fund. Todd Wiseman Jr. is a Florida native writer, producer, director, and all-around filmmaker. Besides being a wonderful advocate for filming in Florida, Todd is taking on one of the larger Florida-based projects in recent years, adapting the novel A Land Remembered into a television series. We talked to Todd about the history of A Land Remembered, his steadfast desire to base the production in Florida, his goals for the television series, challenges and opportunities, why he's such an advocate for filming in Florida in general, and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Todd Wiseman Jr. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Todd.
Thanks for having me, John.
So give us your backstory. Help the audience get to know you a little bit.
For sure. I was born in the one true Hollywood, Florida, and raised in Tampa. Always wanted to be a filmmaker since I was about 8 and put a camera in my hands. And then that was sort of reinforced when I had a really great video production class at Freedom High School in Tampa, where I graduated after 2 years at Blake in Tampa and then 2 years at Freedom. Went to NYU Film School. And then when I was there, met an amazing guy named Milos. We started a wonderful company together for almost 15 years. And then I exited that business to become a full-time filmmaker. That's the very condensed version.
Love it. Love it. You are succinct. That's good. So now you and your producing partner recently announced that A Land Remembered will be adapted into a multi-season TV series. Tell us what first drew you to the project and what about A Land Remembered felt right about reimagining for the screen?
I think almost everyone who reads A Land Remembered closes the final cover and says to themselves, why hasn't this been turned into a movie or a TV show? And I said the same thing. I was probably, very far down the list of people who said, let me look into this. And in fact, I know I am. The property had been under option basically on and off since its publication in the 80s. My angle on it was that it had to be a different format, right? A movie, one single movie to tell this entire story was just too small. It's 3 generations. It spans over 100 years. It's sort of the McIvey story is obviously fiction, but it's historical fiction, and it's a vehicle to tell the story of Florida in a lot of ways. So I pitched it to them in a longer format and ended up getting the rights and then was able to buy them out, as we approached turning this into a show.
Well, now you secured the rights, if I read correctly, in December of 2024. What was the process like? How did you decide the novel did deserve the long-term commitment and how did that appeal to the people that had the rights?
So I actually got the option, is what it's called, in 2021.
Okay.
And then I kind of floated this around Hollywood a little bit through my representatives and through one of our producers who's on the project now. And everyone told me, hey, maybe it's interesting. We'd never heard of this book. It's $80 to $100 million period piece. You need to go out and get a big time showrunner and you have to shoot it in Georgia. And I was like, absolutely not. So then the writer's strike happened and I went in a few other directions and then came back to it, continuing to renew that option until I decided to pay the purchase price. It's very standard when you option a book to turn it into film or TV. You kind of rent it for a while until you're ready to buy it. So that's what we did. And now we're off to the races.
Talk a little bit about, you mentioned that you were being told that you have to film it in Georgia. We all know the incentive situation. But you described filming outside of Florida for this story as almost blasphemous. So talk a little bit about how important it was for you to be able to do it in Florida.
I had the pleasure of getting to sit down with Jeb Bush recently, and he talked about his inauguration in Florida and how in Florida at his inauguration, there were about, 50 American flags and 2 Florida flags. Whereas at his brother's inauguration, there were about 50 Texas flags and 2 American flags. And I think the moral of that story is like Texas has this really, great state pride, and it's something that I believe Florida should have too. I think this novel represents a really beloved story, and the story of Florida in a lot of ways. So the idea that we would film it anywhere else was just completely off the table for me from the outset. But obviously that presented its own set of challenges. Florida currently has no statewide tax incentive, something that I'm personally working with both sides of the aisle to bring something like that back. There's something in drafting now that I think could be really interesting to kind of tell Florida stories, but we doubled down and said, well, this has to be made in Florida, and we were met with a lot of support from the actual government. The state of Florida and the city of Tampa put in, committed the first money into this project, which I think is pretty unheard of, and that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the power of the story, which is taught in many schools and really beloved.
And from what I've read, the series is being framed by some as the Yellowstone of Florida. I know that's a high level to reach, but how do you feel about that description, and what kind of tone and scope are you really aiming for?
Well, Yellowstone is kind of more of a soap opera. I think Taylor Sheridan's a genius, but this is very far from Yellowstone in terms of what kind of show it is. It's definitely less salacious than Yellowstone, more of a family story. I mean, it's visceral, it's violent, it's in your face, but it's not. There's no Beth in this show. In terms of scope and scale, absolutely, I hope it reaches the kind of success that Yellowstone has had. Yellowstone created a universe, right? And then they went back and did 1883 and these other spinoffs. And I have a lot of hope for this A Land Remembered umbrella as an opportunity to tell more Florida stories beyond the McIvy story.
Now, you mentioned that the story spans generations with settlers arriving in the mid 19th century, Florida's agriculture and cattle ranching heritage, and the evolution of the state over the decades. How do you, as a producer, begin to organize all of those elements that are needed to make such a large scope happen within the TV series format?
Well, really, in any format, it's just a matter of doing quite a lot of research and trying to get it right from a visual standpoint. You don't have to show the entire universe, right? We can show little slices and tell the story that way. The way we've decided to contextualize the McIvy story is with historical bookends and modern day bookends. So you'll see throughout this project, we're going to start with a Spanish incursion into native territory where there's a little battle and the pigs get loose and the cows get loose, and that is what sort of sets the stage for what will become the first sort of industry that the McIvys get into, which is cattle. So I love the period piece aspect of this, and I love history. And my mother is a history teacher in Florida, was for her entire most of her career as a public school teacher in Florida, and I just think it's so fascinating. We, just like anything, will have the right locations, right wardrobe, the right production design, and we're working with some amazing people to bring that all to life.
Yeah. And now, how are you approaching the challenge of balancing historical authenticity with dramatic storytelling? I mean, have you worked with historians, researchers, consultants to ensure accuracy?
All of the above, yeah.
Yeah.
I really love Rick Baker, the former mayor of St. Pete, wrote a book that we've been studying very closely. It's a really accurate timeline book, and we kind of compared that with Patrick D. Smith's chronology of what happens with the McIvy family. We've gone very deep with historians of different backgrounds, and then, of course, are working with the Seminole tribe and the Miccosukee tribe to try to get their part of this right. We're working with scientists like Hilary Swain and Archibald Foundation to try to think about like location as a character, right? Like dry scrub and wet prairie, and this, it's all completely different. It's been a huge education for me. And then I think most importantly, I've tried to really immerse myself in with these multi-generation cattle ranchers in Florida. People outside of Florida don't really understand our history as it pertains to cattle ranching, and it's really fascinating. So I've been lucky enough to get to go on a bunch of roundups and marketing and brandings and get to meet these people who have stories from, passed down through the generations from the time of the McIvies.
Yeah. I believe the series is going to be headquartered in Tampa,
Mm.
although Florida locations all over are under consideration. Without giving away too much, what kind of places are you looking at, and what does that say about the story that you want to tell Florida's natural and cultural diversity?
I mean, in the book, they start off in the top of Florida, and by the end, they're down at the bottom of it. I think the Floridians here know that Florida is not just one big flat field. There's actually quite a lot of geography. A place like Payne's Prairie looks totally different than the Everglades, than an oak hammock. There's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. We're working closely with our friend Carlton Ward Jr., who's this prolific wildlife photographer and filmmaker, works with National Geographic to help us capture some of that stuff.
Yeah. Now, how important is it to you to cast authentic Floridians in this?
It's a fine line, right? We want the best actors for the series. So if all the best actors were from Georgia, well, that's who's going to get the part. We are working really hard to involve as many Floridians as possible from the cast side of things. And we held a big youth rodeo, and over 2,000 kids throughout the state applied to play Zach McIvy. And there's a very good chance that it will be one of those kids who is a non-actor who will bring into the fold. But most of the casts you'll see in this, whether or not they're from Florida, will be professional and sometimes famous actors.
Yeah, yeah. Now, given the environmental and logistical challenges inherent in filming a story set across decades and in rugged landscapes, how are you preparing to meet the challenges?
You mean from a physical production
Yeah,
standpoint?
yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, safety's the number one priority for us. We need to be cautious when it comes to everything from snakes to lightning. And I, as a filmmaker, always lean into using blank firing weapons on my shows. So, that's something we handle with a lot of safety. I think just like anything, right? It's like your preparation for any sort of shoot has to revolve around the safety and comfort of the cast and crew. So now that said, I want to get my hands dirty and I want to show stuff that most people have never seen.
Yeah, yeah. What do you see as kind of the biggest risk from a storytelling aspect of adapting such a well-loved and widely taught novel?
Just like anything, a movie or a TV show differs from a book, and that's purely because every time you read something, you're watching your own movie in your head, right? And when you're writing a novel, you're not writing a screenplay. They're very different. You can have the inner thoughts of a character in a novel versus a movie, unless you're going to have the whole thing voiceover. You need to kind of show and tell. So my favorite filmmaker is Stanley Kubrick. All he did was adapt stuff, and he was great at it. So I think there's stuff that you'll recognize that is pretty much beat for beat exactly what happened in the book. But then there are other things that will be entirely new or expanded upon or cut. And that's just because of what adaptation from one format to another means. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not happy, you can blame me because I'm going to have to make some tough decisions. But I think as someone who really cherishes the book, the characters, what it has to say, what it's about, I'm going to try to do it justice.
And I mean, on the other side, what are you looking most forward to about being able to show the story in Florida as opposed to, like you said, it just being in somebody's head as they're reading the novel?
Yeah, I mean, the interior of Florida is not something that I think many people even know about. Even Floridians don't know, what this whole state looks like. And frankly, I didn't know until I started really going deep and these people started showing me their land and their ranches. And I'm just so blown away. I think it's the most beautiful state in the country. And there's so much that I can't wait to showcase. I think in the novel you're reading, Tobias is caught in the crossfire of the Battle of Alessi. I'm really excited to bring stuff like that to life. The descriptions of nature are so epic in the book, and that's both going to be a challenge and a really exciting thing to try to bring to life.
Yeah. Now, Floridians that may be listening, and especially those that have read the book A Land Remembered in school, What do you want them to take away from the TV series that maybe they weren't able to take away in reading the book?
I think the nuance in the characters is something that only a film or a television adaptation could bring to the masses. The inner thoughts of the characters, right? That's something that's interesting. Their inflections and their expressions and how they interact with one another. I think that's going to come across in a much more engaging way. Patrick Smith, was really good, in my opinion, at kind of painting this big series of events and and telling this story. There's a family side of it and there's a character side of it, but I don't want to call it surface level because you cry when people die in this book. I mean, he does something to you as a reader that really captivates you. But I'm excited to just expand a little bit on some of this stuff, the quiet moments and some of the character moments.
This is far from your first project, obviously. And when you look back on some of your previous projects and credits, is there anything that you've done that kind of you can pull from? I mean, besides everything, but I mean, is there anything specific because of what A Land Remembered is going to be that you can kind of pull from experience and help you along the way with this project?
If you look back, hopefully at my work as a whole, you'll be able to say, "Oh yeah, that's from Todd." There's something about it that feels like it was his style. That said, I don't want that to overpower or even distract you from what's happening, which is just a really good story with great characters. So, no, I think I'm early in my filmmaking career, so hopefully this will sort of open up the creative palette, so to speak.
Yeah. Obviously, as an organization, we're huge supporters of people telling Florida stories in Florida, like you're about to do. What advice do you give other filmmakers who may be interested in telling a Florida story through film and television here in the state?
I would just say that I've been met with so much support everywhere I go. And that's from the last several projects I've done here, the School Duel, and then Five Stars, and now this. You hear war stories and horror stories about filming in Florida from people who don't live here or come in and maybe try to take advantage of certain situations. We have a really conducive environment to production. There are crews here that really want to work. There are local incentives, for example, the one that just passed in Orange County, to where you can get significant funding back towards your productions. And there's just, it's not California. Everybody's burnt out here. And, you want to shoot in a flower shop and it's going to cost you $5,000. I think in Florida, people are still excited and maybe even a little naive, which is probably good. So I'm really invested in Florida, what I like to call the free state of filmmaking. I think we can create conditions here that are really unique. Production is leaving not just California and New York, but it's also leaving places like Georgia and it's heading to the UK and it's heading to Europe. And people are seeking big incentives and they're looking for places where the union isn't going to drown you with their bureaucracy and their warfare tactics, for lack of a better term. So I'm hopeful that Florida can be unique in the landscape of places to film from a business perspective. I want people to say, I'm going to come to Florida because it's a right to work state. It's a really exciting place to film. There's people here who are really well trained from a crew perspective, and we have so much to offer.
Yeah, yeah, very well said. Right now, it's the beginning of 2026, a new year. What does the timeline look like? When does production start? When are audience realistically going to be able to see the first season? Give us kind of your timeline.
We start shooting in March and we'll wrap this part one by June. That's the current plan. And then I think you'll see something maybe even before the end of next year, whether that's a trailer or something like that. But I think realistically, 2027 will be the release. And we really would love to take advantage of the $1 billion box office that Florida represents and bring this to theaters in Florida.
Excellent. Interesting. So tell the listeners where they can follow for more updates, where they can get casting, production news, websites, social media, anything you want to share, anywhere people can kind of keep up on the progress.
I'd say we're playing it close to the chest for now. We will put anything that we want out there publicly on our website, which is alandremembered.org. We'll put relevant press articles There is a link to casting information there, so you can get in touch with our casting director. But yeah, hopefully when the time comes, Florida will be awash in a land remembered advertising.
Todd, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today. I know how busy your schedule is leading up to production and helping share the story of A Land Remember. And of course, thanks so much for your commitment to filming in Florida. Thanks for being on the Film Floor podcast today.
Thanks, John. It was a real pleasure. I thought you asked wonderful questions, and I'm really excited to not only make A Land Remembered here, but make many, many more things. In fact, I never want to make anything anywhere else. So let it be known, I'm never leaving Florida.
We love to hear that. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org and like or follow our social media pages. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.26 for our 2026 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.